What is entrepreneurship? Entrepreneurship isn't very natural. It defies many of our most human instincts. Our desire for security, our fear of crazy risks, our tendency to go with the flow and not make too many waves. As much as we think of ourselves as unique individuals, we also like to fit in and to be chosen by those who fit in and were chosen before us. And yet, there is always that one person who we know who goes the other way, who embraces a different set of instincts, the kind that have driven humans for millennia to leave home, to push boundaries, and to build. But most of the history, we have called that kind of person an explorer. But in the 21st century, with the frontiers that are still open for exploration no longer physical, but technological, social, intellectual, and economic, we have given that person a new name, entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is a person who strikes out on their own to reach these frontiers of progress, aware of both the risks and the rewards of going it alone. They are driven to discover what might be found out there. They feel the call to make something out of what they find, something new, better, faster, more efficient, and to make it accessible to the rest of us in a way that we can use. It could be a product, or a service, or an idea that spurs its own kind of exploration, starting the cycle anew. It doesn't matter. What matters is that anyone can be an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs aren't chosen, they are made, self-made. You could be an entrepreneur. Maybe you already are. Maybe you have already heard the call of an idea that gets you excited, of a problem that needs a solution, of a friend who needs help that you are uniquely suited to provide. Either way, what follows is a critical set of things to think about as you prepare to cross the Rubicon of entrepreneurship into truly uncharted territory. Chapter 1. Be open to ideas. People start businesses for all kinds of reasons. They do it to satisfy a dream, or to solve a problem, or to fill a void in the market. Some people want to improve on something that seems obsolete, and others want to reinvent an entire industry. There are literally dozens of on-ramps to entrepreneurial journey. But no matter which one you take, at some point you are going to need an idea, something specific, something concrete and unique and new, an idea that makes life better or more interesting and delivers on the reason you wanted to start a business in the first place. Sounds simple enough, right? After all, ideas are a damn a dozen. Or at least that's what many of us are led to believe. That ideas are easy and abundant. That what matters is execution. And all of that is true to some extent. It's just not the whole truth. Because coming up with a good idea is hard. Good ideas are hard to find and hard to get right. But once you find one, they're also very hard to turn away from them. That's what makes good ideas so intimidating. Not that you won't ever find one, but that one day you will. And when you do, it's very possible that your life will never be the same again. So where do you find one of these good ideas? Where do you look? Can you look? Or do you have to wait for the angels to sing in your ear and the light bulb to go on over your head? Some people are lucky. And this epiphany happens for them early. An idea hits them out of the blue and sends them on their way. For most of us, though, it isn't so simple. We have to look for a good idea, or at least be open to receiving it. It's one of the eternal entrepreneurial questions. Can you actually find a good idea, or does it have to find you? The answer is the same for both options. Yes. Chef and restaurateur Jose Andres told me that ideas happen when you are actively moving and searching. When I asked him how he came up with his first restaurant concept in the early 1990s, a small place restaurant called Holeo that revolutionized Washington, D.C. dining and then launched 1,000 competitors nationwide, his answer was simple. I was looking. Lisa Price, on the other hand, wasn't actually looking for the idea that would come. Carol's daughter, her beauty brand, which the makeup and personal care giant L'Oreal would eventually snap up for north of a mid-8 figures in 2014. She sighed, I thought that I had found a career. I found the career that I was going to do for the rest of my life, Lisa told me. A graduate of the High School of Music and Art in New York City, she was in her late 20s and had just come through a decade-long gauntlet of unrewarding clerical jobs, first at American Express, then at the United Nations, then in health care, along with a brief and emotionally devastating attempt at a singing career in between. She was living with her soon-to-be husband in a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn when, in the late 1980s, through a friend, she found herself in what she thought was her dream job, writer's assistant on the Cosby Show. This was, of course, long before the tragic drama surrounding the show's eponymous star that has changed how we think about everything Bill Cosby created. The Cosby Show was then the most popular sitcom on television, and for African American, arguably one of the most important television shows ever made. It was particularly incredible being an African American woman and what that show meant to me and my family, Lisa told me. To see African Americans depicted in such a positive light, and for me to be standing in the Huxtable kitchen the morning of my first table read, as I'm listening to the cast read the script, I could have just floated off at that point. In the years that followed, she could have floated off to any number of television production jobs: script supervisor, production coordinator, producer, and that's what I thought I was going to do, she recalled. Then one day, Lisa read an article about one of the greatest and apparently best-smelling musicians of all time. I'm a huge Prince fan, Lisa said, and this article talked about how he always smelled very good, and the reason for it was he kept an assortment of fragrances on his bureau. He put a Chanel No. 5 in his boots. Lisa happens to love fragrance. She always has. But her fascination had never gone much beyond the appreciation of a consumer. Prince made her realize that fragrance was so much more than an accessory. It was a form of a creative expression, art. I just loved the idea of this blending of fragrances and creating this unique scents, she said, reflecting not just on interest that she shared with Prince, which was obviously totally cool, but also on the moment that really got the ball rolling for her. Over the next few years, Lisa started to read and research the different kinds of scent notes in the perfumes, top notes, heart notes, base notes, and how to combine them. She learned the art of application, the way that your fragrance lasts on your body is you layer it, she explains to me casually during our conversation, as I'm sure she had done for thousands of people before me. Quote, you wash with it, you moisturize with it, then you spritz it on, end quote. Early on, she tried blending drugstore lotions with various fragrances from her collection to make her own scented moisturizer. But she only ended up making a mess. They weren't balanced from a chemistry perspective, so things would just separate, she said. Eventually, browsing the shelves of a New Age bookstore with her husband one Sunday afternoon in Brooklyn's Park Slope neighborhood, she came across a book on essential oils that also included a recipe for things like massage oil, hair oil, creams, balms, and butters. Everything she lacked. I thought, this is great. I can make my own lotions. Lisa recalled. The recipe was very bare bones, and they used these things like paraffin and lanolin, which I wasn't too crazy about using. I wanted to use beeswax, and I wanted to find the cocoa butter. So I used the skeleton of the recipes within the book, and then I just started adding my own combinations. I could go back and tweak it if something came out running or too thick or too oily or too stiff, and adjust the recipe accordingly. By the early 1990s, Lisa had her formulas down. Lotions and body butters that hold together just the way she wanted. Lotions she could actually use. Now, if you are anything like me, when Lisa first told me this story, you would assume that these first lotions were the beginning of the Carol's Daughters empire as we know it. Not quite. In those first few years, none of Lisa's creations were for public consumption. They weren't for sale. They were only for her. They were made with fragrances she liked, with ingredients like aloe vera and cocoa butter that she preferred, that addressed the moisturizing needs of her skin. This was her hobby, after all. It was for fun. She wasn't trying to please anyone else. She was, scratching her own itch. Why wouldn't her creation match her preferences? Plus, it wasn't like she was making this stuff as a diversion from, or a fast track to a different life. She was very happy with her career. I was ecstatic. I was wonderful, Lisa said. And I think because I was very happy at what I was doing with work, when I had my downtime, I didn't have that desperate feeling that you feel when you're like, oh God, I'm finally not at work, and I just want to relax and veg out. So I became creative when I was at home. The sheer joy of tinkering and stretching her creative limits sustained Lisa all the way through the end of the Cosby Show, which went off the air in 1992. She spent the next year as a freelance production assistant, bouncing from show to show until the summer, when the television business in New York traditionally gets very slow and the work dries up. That's when her mother, Carol, suggests Lisa try to sell her lotions and creams at their church's upcoming flea market. It was May 1993, and Lisa thought it would be nice to make some money and contribute more toward the household expenses during the summer lull. But still, she was skeptical. I said, "Really, Mommy? Do you think people would pay for this?" We know the answer to that question now, and with hindsight, it seems self-evident. But in the moment, Lisa's apprehension would have been a totally reasonable reaction for someone who, for the first time, was being asked to think about her personal creation as a product marketed to other people, as a business idea. In this way, at least as entrepreneurial stories go, Lisa Price is the most like the rest of us. She was so passionate about what she did. It was so intrinsically rewarding, just as an activity, that it didn't even occur to her to take the next step with her idea, to sell it, or to turn it into a business. It was almost weird for her, as her response to her mother clearly illustrates, to even think other people would be interested. I have heard numerous variations of this story from a number of entrepreneurs. I even liked myself one. Yet, not to a growing popularity of the podcast, we decided to take the show on the road and do live interviews in big theaters. I mean, for the majority of my career, I have come to audiences as a disembodied voice through their car radio speakers or their earbuds. No one wanted to see me, I thought. For weeks, often months, before each of these initial live events, I worried whether enough of our fans would be interested in watching two people talk on stage. I wondered aloud to anyone who would listen, much as Lisa Price did to her mother, whether people would actually pay for this, and not just the $50 for a ticket, but also the cost of child care and parking and all the other things that go along with a night at a theater. As luck would have it, we sold out nearly every one of those early live shows, and each time it happened, it was a genuine shock to me, because when you are not looking for a good business idea, it just doesn't seem real when one finds you, even when the proof is staring you in the face. This is especially true. I learned in talking with Lisa, when the idea involves consumer products. Products are things on shelves in stores with labels and barcodes on them, and a price that ended in $99. In 1993, Lisa was making these lotions in her kitchen and storing them in Tupperware containers she had in the cupboard. She didn't have names for them. They were just whatever they were. And let's say she took her mom up on this crazy idea to set up a table at the flea market. What was she going to sell them in? Let me stop here for this episode, and we'll continue next.